Hello, everyone. So my name is Philip Kasumu. I'm sure you guys just watched our founder, David Goldberg's presentation just now from Founders Pledge. So I head up Europe for Founders Pledge. I head up on the growth side. And today I have the pleasure of speaking with Michael Faye from GiveDirectly and Taptap Send. So Michael, it's great to have this conversation with you. But for those who don't know who you are, how would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, gosh. Oh boy, there's so much to say. So I've spent the last decade or so of my life trying to put resources more efficiently in the hands of the poor. The first organization I founded, GiveDirectly, we founded about 10 years ago, and I've been the president of GiveDirectly. And then we have founded two for-profit organizations, one called Segovia, which is a B2B payments platform for the emerging markets, and Taptap Send, which is a remittance company focused on bringing fairly priced remittances to the emerging markets.
Awesome. Yes, you've had such an incredible career and journey so far within the fintech space specifically. So I'd love to kick off and kind of talk about, I guess, GiveDirectly, following on from David's presentation. So where did the idea for GiveDirectly come from, and giving money directly to the most vulnerable people?
Yeah, so way back when I did a PhD in economics, and it was at an interesting time. So it was the early 2000s, to date myself. And a bunch of folks, Esther Duflo, Michael Kramer, Abhijit Banerjee, and many others, were bringing some of the more rigorous evaluation techniques that we had used in medicine and even in tech, frankly, to the field of development economics. They recently won a Nobel Prize for that work, and to synthesize a Nobel Prize literature, I think what we learned is that what we thought worked often did not work as well as we had hoped. Very traditional interventions like training programs, microfinance, did not always meet the promise that we had hoped for.
Yeah.
And then this very simple, almost naive intervention of simply giving people money to make them less poor worked remarkably well. And that got us thinking, and we said, oh, this is great. We should give some of our small stipend this way. And as it turned out at the time, lots of people were doing cash, but it was just not a way that a donor like me could give. And we called many orgs, and they just couldn't do it. So, got on the plane and started to give out money in Kenya. And then little by little, it's grown. And this year, in the first half of the year, we have raised almost about a little bit less than 200 million that we'll be able to give out to recipients across the countries that we're working in.
Oh no, that's incredible. And again, for those who don't know, GiveDirectly is actually one of our top recommended charities at Founders Pledge. So the work that you guys have been doing, we've been monitoring it, and it truly is awesome. But I guess when it comes to philanthropy and giving, what have been some of the biggest misconceptions that you find people have, especially with regards to cash transfers? Because, philanthropy and charities don't necessarily give. I think you're very unique and probably the first mover within that sense of giving just direct cash as opposed to a solution or a medication or a product or providing a service. So I guess what's the biggest misconception people have when it comes to giving?
I think there's so many misconceptions in the philanthropic space, and you all do this, so but it is extraordinarily hard to get good information about charities. And there are historic reasons. There are, like, the way the IRS asks you to report things with this concept of overhead, which is essentially quite meaningless because management can dictate what goes in that bucket. So it's been hard. So I think one of the things that we have pushed is the idea that you should know two things about what you're doing. You should know what the impact is, and you should know that from some rigorous evaluation, probably a randomized trial. Right. You should also know the cost of delivery. So how much does it actually cost you to deliver? Not in this IRS accounting sense, but in a real sense. So if I get $100, how much winds up in the hands of a recipient? And then you can make a decision for yourself about what you want to do. Now, what makes cash so interesting is two things. One is when you tell people that you're simply giving cash, they ask lots of questions, lots of good questions. How do you know it's giving to the right people? How do you know people don't steal it? And so on and so forth. These are great questions. I've been encouraging people to ask them about every organization, not just cash. And the second thing about cash is it challenges us not only to ask what is best, but it challenges us to ask who gets to define what's best. So if there are two families making the impossible choice of whether to feed their newborn, send their daughter to secondary school, or invest in their husband's business, but they don't get to pick three, they get to pick one of those things. That's an impossible choice for anyone to make. And someone may pick education, someone may pick hunger, and someone may invest. Now, I just ask you in the broad group, which of those is the best? And I think there's one view where we'll run it through a model and make some decision. There's another view where we'll have some personal bias. Mm-hmm. And then there's a bit of the cash philosophy, which says that's not my decision to make. That's an impossible decision, and I'm going to let the family make it themselves and respect them as individual decision makers who have their own preferences.
That's yeah, sorry, no, you cut out there. No, it's a very difficult decision to make, right? Almost impossible.
Yeah.
And I guess in the context of COVID-19, what has been the direct impact of direct cash transfers in the context of COVID-19? What have you guys seen at GiveDirectly through this pandemic?
Yeah, well, COVID has just increased the focus on cash transfers in what's really an unprecedented way. And it's not just GiveDirectly, right? GiveDirectly will give out about 200 million so far, which is meaningfully more than we did last year for the full year. But it's not just GiveDirectly, it's global. More countries are going to cash programming. I think you've got about 150 countries doing a cash response to COVID. And right now, about 15% of the world's population is getting a cash response to COVID. So it's a tremendous number of people, which begs a bit of the question of why. And I think there are a few pieces. One is just an operational piece, which is much of what we've traditionally done, giving food, other things, are complicated by the reality of COVID.
Right.
One of the beauties of cash and the way we do it is it can be done remotely. So we can enroll people remotely through tech, and then we can pay them through digital finance. And that's exactly what we're doing. So there's a very practical reason why people are going to cash. But I think there's also a universality of COVID. We all know people affected. We all know people affected economically. And when we are forced to put ourselves in that position and ask, how would I like to be helped? We stop othering the person that's affected. It's not the other person that's affected, that's poor.
Yeah.
And we start asking, what would we like? Would we like someone to drop off some canned goods and some old dolls and old toys?
Yeah.
Or would we rather the money to make the decision about whether we're going to pay rent or buy food or do something or pay for our medicine? Yeah. And I think the universality has pushed people to think more about that, which is why you've seen more of this interest. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, so I was going to say, and obviously the work that GiveDirectly have done during this pandemic has not only been in Africa, but it's also been to affected communities within the US. And so I guess the next question is, do you think that during this period, we've kind of strengthened the case for kind of, UBI, universal basic income?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of questions baked into that question. I'll do my best. I think this has been a journey, like from Milton Friedman and Martin Luther King to where we are today. There have been many people that have contributed, and you kind of first the ideas were introduced 30 plus years ago, if not more. Then you had the building of the evidence base. Then you had the popularization and philanthropy through GiveDirectly and others. Then Andrew Yang takes it to the presidential stage. Then COVID happens and you have this bipartisan support for a federal cash transfer program. essentially. So I think a lot of people have contributed, and it's not just the universality of COVID. The UBI piece is interesting because the way it often gets talked about is that UBI and cash transfers are the same. The reality is it's different. Universal basic income is a very specific form of cash transfer. We won't have time to go into all the differences and whether.
Yeah, of course.
But I do think it has certainly strengthened support for going to a more cash-based social programming.
No, absolutely. And I guess during this whole pandemic as well, what have been some of the challenges that you've personally experienced? And, running, I guess, 2 companies as well, right? Have you seen a significant decline, or have you seen like a spike? Are people sending, with Taptap Send, which is the remittance platform? What have you seen take place during this process?
Yeah, well, things have been busy across the companies. I think folks often forget that nonprofits have cost.
Yeah,
you'll see 100% of your money goes. Well, that's impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And they also expect you to scale infinitely, and that has been the biggest stress. Which is we have. I forget exactly how much we've given out thus far this year, but it's well over 100 million. That's more than 4 times what we did in the first 6 months of last year. So We've essentially had to scale our organization 4x.
Wow. And this is GiveDirectly, not Taptap Send.
That's GiveDirectly. While remote, and shifting to remote. And the team has done just an amazing job. And not only did we scale 4x, we went from a model that was based on meeting people in their homes and enrolling them in their homes to one that's now essentially completely remote. So if you ask the biggest challenge, it's how do you scale 4x while going fully remote and disrupting your entire traditional supply chain along the way.
Okay. But you guys have done an incredible job. And, as I mentioned earlier, GiveDirectly have been our top, one of our top responders for the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's definitely what we've been directing a lot of our donors to commit to, who have shown express a lot of interest in kind of helping the situation today. So I guess you guys are doing the right things. I guess, what role do you see donors playing in transforming the sector? Whether that be founders or entrepreneurs, but what role do you kind of see donors playing in transforming philanthropy and the way people think about it?
I think philanthropy has a tremendous role to play. And even if you use the GiveDirectly journey, and again, there were many people that have contributed, but I certainly think that we were able to take risks, to do evaluations, to do things that people couldn't have done necessarily at a government level, and put it on the map for people and help. Not only we built the evidence base, we helped build public support, and we've made it a lot easier for governments and organizations that can't necessarily take those risks to shift. And when you think about what the value of $1 donated to GiveDirectly is, I say at a minimum, you're going to change someone's life because that dollar is going to get passed through to them. And at best, you're going to wind up changing the sector by pushing it towards a less paternalistic place, a more efficient place, and one that really puts the recipient at the center of what we're doing and not the donor.
Right. No, that's spot on. And I guess, speaking about transforming the sector, speaking about open banking, I'm sure you're familiar with open banking and the PSD2 regulations. What role do you see the charity sector taking advantage of these new legislations and the open banking movement, if any?
I think you'll see the biggest impact and the first impact on the private sector, on companies like the remittance companies and other places where PSD2 will help with risk and things. I think on the tech side, the charity sector is often catching up, and there are some structural reasons for that. So I think it can lower price and things, but again, I'm not sure that's the biggest constraint right now for us. I mean, to give you a sense, we are having our best year of efficiency. So what that means is that for every dollar donated right now during COVID, I think we're getting about 98 cents of that to the recipient. And so we're essentially running an entire organization at a lower cost than a lot of remittance products.
Yeah. And I guess finally, other than cash transfers and open banking, what other role do you see fintech playing within the charity sector? Are there any products, any services that you would like to see or invest in, or like where else are we missing the trick when it comes to fintech and charity?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be deliberately provocative here. I think we should separate charity from businesses. I think there are many great fintech businesses to be built in the emerging market. But if you can build it as a business, I would build it as a business.
Right.
Giving people money is not a good business. So GiveDirectly could never have been a business, nor should it be. But I think there are lots of savings product, there are borrowing constraints, there's so many various challenges right now of people accessing digital finance. But I would probably do a lot of those as social enterprises.
Awesome. And my last question, I know we're running out of time. How are you managing your time? I mean, obviously you're running in 2 companies right now, both probably in very high demand, especially during this period. So how are you prioritizing your time? How are you putting processes in place? Like, are there any kind of life hacks or hacks you can share with everyone in terms of time management?
Sure, it's a longer chat. I'll give you the sad life hack is I think most people have work, life, sleep, and I think I have work, sleep.
Okay.
But I think if I had to summarize, I'd say write your plan down every day and be as specific as possible. And then the teams know that my other biggest life hack is I go to bed embarrassingly early on Sundays so I can start Monday at about 5 a.m. or even earlier sometimes and get going on the week.
Awesome. Michael, it's been great to chat with you. I think that's all we have time for right now. But for those who want to be involved with GiveDirectly, of course, would you like to share any information in terms of how they can get in touch or if they want to learn more?
Yeah, please. It's just givedirectly.org. And then if folks have individual questions, it's just my first name dot last name at givedirectly.org.
Awesome. And guys, if you're interested in learning more about Founders Pledge, you can contact me, Philip at founderspledge.com. I'd love to have a chat with you about what we do here and how you could, help us, get more money to GiveDirectly and other amazing charities.
Thanks so much, Philip, and thanks for all the work that you all have done.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Take care.